if you were given an honor for our high holiday services this year, you know that a shul cloud sort of automatically churns them out and sends you an email and, you know, asks you yes or no, and then if you say yes, you get another letter, thank you for accepting the honor. And apparently there's no way to like override this, so I got a shul cloud letter asking me if I would give the sermon this morning. Many of you are probably wishing that I had said no. But here we are. So, it was Sunday morning, November 7th, 2021. I was on the New Jersey Turnpike somewhere in South Jersey, driving north. My phone rings. I answer it safely using the Bluetooth built into our car. And the voice on the other end belongs to the funeral director who's handling the funeral for my dad, who died the previous day, and he wants to know where my dad's Tallis is. For those of you who might not know, in a traditional Jewish burial, the deceased is buried in white shrouds known as tafrichim. If the deceased is male, they're also wrapped in their talit, but the tzitzit in one corner is cut off to make the talit no longer usable. This symbolizes that the deceased is no longer required or able to observe the mitzvot. Now, my dad was not particularly observant, but he had grown up in a traditional Yiddish-speaking immigrant home. He once told me that non-kosher meat had never entered his mouth until he was in the U.S. Army during the Korean War. He wanted his funeral to be strictly traditional because, he said, he was born a Jew. He never hid the fact that he was a Jew. He got beaten up in the U.S. Army because he was a Jew. And he would die and be buried as a Jew. When he passed, my stepmother and stepsister went to look for his tallis, but they couldn't find it. I told the funeral director that I didn't know where it was, but I assumed that it was probably in a drawer in his bedroom. My dad and his wife only attended services on the high holidays or for a family simcha, so he wouldn't have needed to keep it anywhere where it was easily accessible on a regular basis, especially considering that they lived in a tiny apartment in Queens. In the end, my stepmother and stepsister couldn't find the talit, and so he was buried in an inexpensive talit provided by the funeral home, like the polyester ones we have in the hallway, and presumably charged to the bill, rather than in his own. My dad retired at age 65, and he died at age 92. And for all but the last few months of his life, he was generally in good health, which meant, among other things, that for about 27 years, he had a lot of time on his hands. And I don't think he ever realized how busy a shul rabbi can be, especially around the fall holidays or around Pesach. So it was not uncommon for me to call him and be greeted by the following sentence or something like it. So, you finally remember that you have a father. Now, all of us have weak spots and buttons that are easily pushed. And I do not handle criticism well at all. And Kelly will happily tell you that if you don't believe me. So my dad's desire to be called more frequently than I called him ran right up against my desire to avoid criticism. And on more than one occasion, I decided that if I was going to get chastised when I called him, I wouldn't call him at all. And this might go on for several weeks until my stepmother would phone and plead with me to speak to my dad. When I visited my dad for Father's Day in June 2021, it became clear to me that he was probably in the last few months of his life. So I made a commitment to call him more regularly, to visit him in New York as frequently as I could, and try not to get upset if he made a snarky comment about the frequency of my calls. I fell into a rhythm of calling him every 2 or 3 days at least, and for sure every Friday afternoon after I finished work and before I got ready for Kehilat Shalom. A few weeks before he died, my stepmother said that my dad was so happy. I feel as if I have my son back, he said to her. I miss that rhythm of calling him on Friday afternoons now that he's gone. So my dad passed away in November of 2021, and in June of 2023, my stepmother left their tiny 2-bedroom apartment in Queens and moved to an assisted living facility in the Boston area, close to her daughter. On Christmas Day 2023, I drove up to New Jersey to visit my brother. Shortly after I got there, he handed me a reusable Trader Joe's shopping bag and said that it had a lot of stuff of our dad's that he had found in the Queens apartment when he was helping our stepmother clean it out. He'd already taken the items that he really wanted to keep, and I was welcome to take anything in the bag that I wanted. As I was pulling things out of the bag, one of the items turned out to be a blue velvet bag with silver embroidery of 2 lions and the word Tallis in Hebrew. I opened it and I pulled out my dad's Tallis. I recall that I was with him when he bought it in Mea Shearim, the ultra-Orthodox neighborhood in Jerusalem, when he came to visit me when I was studying in Israel. Like most rabbis who have congregations, I have 2 talitot that I wear regularly. One I keep in the shul for Shabbat and holidays, and one I keep at home to use for my own daily prayers or when we have morning services that are only on Zoom. As soon as I got home from visiting my brother, my dad's Tallis became my weekday home Tallis. The first time that I wrapped myself in my dad's Tallis, I felt his embrace almost as if he was physically hugging me. More than 9 months later, I still feel that way when I put it on. Did my dad somehow make sure his wife and stepdaughter wouldn't be able to find his Tallis so that eventually it would come to me? When he was dying, did he purposely put it somewhere that they were unlikely to look? Or did he somehow intervene from the afterlife to accomplish this purpose? I'd actually like to think that this was the case, as unlikely as it seems. Regardless, I now pray wearing my dad's tallis, and I feel a warmth and grace that I did not feel that often when he was still alive. I am sure that however it happened, that the tallis couldn't be found for my dad's burial, and thus came into my possession, I wouldn't feel the same way while wearing it had we not repaired our relationship in the months prior to his death. As a colleague said to me when I told him this story a few weeks ago, the question we often need to ask ourselves is, do you want to be right, or do you want to save the relationship? Do you want to be right, or do you want to save the relationship? I felt then, and I actually still feel, that my father was overly critical of me at times. And I distinctly remember when I was a kid, he would tell my grandmother many times, my grandmother would complain that we didn't call her often enough, and he would say to her, you know, the phone works both ways. So, as far as I'm concerned, I was right. And I'm sure that my dad felt that he was right. But at the end of the day, our relationship was more important than being right or getting the other person to admit that they were wrong, however enjoyable that might be. Now, Kehilat Shalom's motto is, where friends become family. Let me let you in on a little secret. Families don't always live together harmoniously. And this has been the case since the beginning of human history. A more accurate name for the biblical book of Genesis might well be the book of dysfunctional families. And unfortunately, our congregation often has a culture where it becomes the norm for someone on the losing end of a debate to, as it were, pick up their ball and go home, or stick around and be purposely obstructionist. Now, as a community, we have a lot of decisions to make over the next few weeks and months. All of us have our own desires and ideas for what Kehilat Shalom 2.0 should look like. What should our new home be? Where should it be located? Should we rent? And if so, rent here or rent somewhere else? Should we buy a new building? Should we build something from scratch? Should we stay in the general area where we are now? Or should we move elsewhere? Must our new space be large enough for our attendance on the high holidays? Or should we gear it to our normal week-in, week-out attendance and rent a bigger space when we need it? Right? And you could all add your other questions to the decisions that we have to make. okay? And there are lots of decisions, okay? And chances are pretty good that not every decision we make as a community will be precisely the one that you prefer in every instance. Okay, I can tell you I have answers to all of those questions, right? And I am pretty certain that not every single one of those questions is going to be resolved precisely the way I think it should be, right? And I guarantee, right, you as an individual may not have a preference for each of those questions, but you have for some of them, right? And I guarantee that at least one of the decisions that we make is not going to be the decision that you prefer, right? But what makes us the community we are, and what has allowed us to continue as a community for as long as we have under challenging circumstances, is the relationships that exist between us. Okay, and you know, I've said this before, but I'll repeat it, or if you haven't heard it. You know, when I came here, everyone, right? Members of the search committee, other rabbis in the area said, don't buy a house. Don't buy a house, okay? You're not going to be there that long, not because of you, but because the shul's not going to be there that long, right? And so, for the first 2 years, we rented, right? And then, 11 years ago, we bought a house. Why did we decide at that point? Because realtors said, if you own a house for at least 3 years, you'll come out even, right? The equity will rise enough to overcome the cost, the sales, the commissions and the closing costs and whatever, and you'll come out even if you own it for 3 years. And at that point, people were saying, the shul has 3 more years left. So we figured, all right, we'll take a risk and we'll buy a house, right? And it's not 2 years after I came here, and it's not 5 years after I came here. It's now 13 years after I came here, and we're still here, right? And by here, I mean, we're still here. And I don't know, next year we may not be here, but we will still be here as a community if that's what we want, right? And if that's what we want, then we have to feel that maintaining the relationship is more important than being right. And I'm glad that eventually I decided that maintaining the relationship with my dad was more important than being right, even though I was right. And I will never, ever, ever acknowledge that I was not right. But in the end, it didn't matter, right? And I'm reminded of the importance of relationships every time I wrap myself in my dad's house. Shana Yoter Tova, and may we have a year that's better than the one that just ended. And we continue now with Musaf. And so we turn to page 200.